I hadn't been home in over 5 years. Not since I left with a single duffel bag and no goodbye. Not since the night I overheard my own mother tell her friends, she's just not like her brother. My brother, David. The golden boy, the lawyer, the pride. The son whose face was still framed on every hallway wall. He was getting married now, and my invitation arrived as an afterthought. No call, no message, just a mass-printed card that read, "Join us in celebrating the marriage of David and Eliza." No mention of me by name, no RSVP line for sister of the groom. But still, I went. Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I should have let silence be my revenge. But something in me, something small and scarred, wanted them to see me. Even if just once. Even if it hurt. The venue was a sprawling vineyard estate outside town, the kind of place with valet parking and string quartets playing Bach beneath glass chandeliers. I arrived in a modest rental car parked off to the side. No one noticed. As I walked toward the entrance, I could see the guests pouring in, all laughter and hugs and pastel dresses. I caught sight of my father near the fountain. He didn't even blink when he saw me, just raised an eyebrow, like I was someone he'd once met at work and forgotten. "Hey," I said. My voice cracked in the air like glass. He nodded. "You made it." Then he turned back to his conversation. Inside it was worse. A woman in pearls took my name at the welcome table and hesitated. She looked at the seating chart back at me and forced a tight smile. "Right this way, miss." She led me to a table near the far end of the reception tent. Brightly colored plastic cups, animal crackers, and a few sticky booster seats. The kids' table. I looked around for a moment, waiting for her to correct the mistake. She didn't. I sat. A little girl in a purple dress leaned toward me and whispered, "Are you the babysitter?" I gave her a weak smile. Not today. The ceremony hadn't started yet, but already the whispers were circling. I saw familiar faces, uncles who'd once pinched my cheeks too hard, cousins who'd posted baby photos of me on Facebook without asking. They all acted like I was a stranger. Even my mother walked past without acknowledgement. She was fussing over the flowers. "Make sure the peonies face the guests," she told a young assistant. "It's David's day. Everything has to be perfect." Everything, except me. I watched as my brother took photos with Eliza near the rose arbor. He looked handsome, happy, exactly the way a groom should look. And I wasn't jealous. I wasn't. But I couldn't stop the ache that bloomed inside my chest. The ache of not belonging, of being forgotten. A waiter passed me by with champagne and skipped me. I lifted my hand too late. He was gone. I took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. It was soft and blue and cloudless. I thought of the silence that had filled my apartment that morning, the way I'd laced my boots, the way I'd checked my watch twice before locking the door behind me. There was a time I would have cried. But that time was gone. Now I waited, and then the rumble. Faint at first, like thunder far away, then louder, closer. The tent flaps quivered, napkins fluttered, guests turned. One man gasped, "Is that?" Another pointed to the sky. "That's a military chopper." My heart didn't race. It slowed. Because I knew. I stood up slowly, calmly, and began walking across the lawn, past the children's table, past the dismissiveness, past the string quartet who had stopped playing mid-note. My heels sank into the grass with every step. But I kept walking. Toward the sound. Toward the moment. Toward the part of the story no one expected me to own. But what they didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was what it took for me to walk like that. The training. The years. The nights alone in barracks learning to ignore the ache of loneliness. The mornings I ran before sunrise chasing a version of myself I hadn't even met yet. Every step I took across that lawn was paved by sacrifice. They saw a woman walking, but I was marching, and I wasn't alone. My past walked with me. Every word they'd spoken behind my back. Every time they'd laughed at my expense. Every holiday invitation I never received. They were all here now watching, But I wasn't looking at them anymore. I was walking toward the chopper. Toward the life I had built piece by piece, discipline by discipline, without any of their help. A gust of wind pushed through the tent as the helicopter descended. Chairs toppled. Dresses flared. The string quartet covered their instruments. I kept walking, and somewhere deep in the chaos, I heard my mother's voice again. She's just not like her brother. No, I wasn't. I was never supposed to be, because I wasn't built to decorate their table. I was built to lead, and now, for the first time in years, I was exactly where I was supposed to be.
Scene.
The chopper touched down with a roar that silenced everything else. Dust kicked up like a curtain. The guests shielded their eyes. My mother clutched her pearls. David turned to look, lips parting in confusion. And I stepped out. Full dress uniform, medals polished, boots planted steady on the ground like I'd been standing there my whole life. A man in a dark suit stepped forward from the aircraft. He moved with purpose and stopped beside me, offering a crisp salute. "Ma'am," he said. "Director Langley sends his regards." Gasps, actual gasps. People were standing now. Whispers turned to stares. One guest dropped their champagne glass. Another backed up and bumped into the cake table. But I didn't flinch. I returned the salute slow and deliberate. And then I walked forward through their shock, through their silence, toward my brother's wedding altar. Each step was measured like a beat in a long overdue song. I didn't rush. I didn't smile. I simply moved through them like a story unfolding in real time. Eliza's maid of honor whispered, "Who is that?" My mother's voice trembled. "That's my daughter." For the first time in a decade, those words meant something. I reached the front row. David turned fully now, eyes wide. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, spiritually. Like the pedestal he stood on had crumbled. "Hey," he said, voice unsure. "Hey," I replied. Not cold, not cruel, just calm. Like someone who no longer needed to prove anything. He opened his mouth again, but the officiant spoke first. "We're about to begin." I nodded and stepped aside, taking a place near the aisle. Not at the kids' table, not in the shadows, but there, present, unignorable. The ceremony began. Words were said. Vows exchanged. But the energy had shifted. The perfect image was cracked, and everyone could see it. The golden boy had a sister. One they forgot to mention, and she had returned. After the ceremony, during the reception, people started to approach me. Slowly, hesitantly, like I might vanish if they got too close. "You've done well for yourself," said an aunt I hadn't spoken to in years. "I didn't know," said a cousin, clutching his wine like a shield. "I didn't realize you were military." "I thought you were still in Colorado," said my mother. I looked her in the eye. "I haven't lived in Colorado since before Kabul." Her lips parted. But no apology came, only silence. That was fine. I'd made peace with silence. It spoke louder than her words ever did. Later, I stood near the edge of the property watching as the sun began to set behind the vineyard hills. The string quartet had started again, but this time they weren't the loudest thing in the space. I was. Not because I was talking, but because I was undeniable. Eliza came over, dress trailing behind her like a sigh. She looked nervous. "I didn't know," she said. "I know. I'm sorry about the seating." "I'm not," I said. It showed me exactly what I needed to remember. She hesitated. "David never told me much." "David never asked much," I said. We stood there for a moment, just two women who had married one into the family, one out of it. "Are you staying long?" she asked. "No," I replied. "I have a plane to catch. Missions don't pause for weddings." She looked at me, then not like I was a threat or a stranger, but like someone she could finally see. "I'm glad you came." I nodded. "So am I." As the music played and laughter returned to the air, I walked back toward the chopper. My heels clicked against the flagstone, each sound a reminder. I wasn't just passing through, I had arrived. And when I stepped back into the aircraft, I didn't look back. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need to. The hum of the helicopter faded behind me as I walked across the tarmac of the secure base. It was dusk again, The sky had that same dusty purple hue I remembered from my first deployment when I was 19, afraid and full of fire I didn't know how to direct yet. Back then I had everything to prove and nowhere to belong. Now I had both. I headed toward the barracks boots, steady shoulders square. But inside, the silence had begun again. Not the kind others gave me, but the one I gave myself whenever something old started to resurface. Memories I had no time for. Ghosts I had locked away in the thick steel drawer of discipline. I reached my quarters and shut the door behind me. Took off the jacket, hung it with precision. Sat on the edge of my bunk and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding since I stepped foot at that vineyard. For the first time in years, I saw it clearly. They weren't just cruel. They were careless. The kind of people who forget the names of waiters, who skip thank you cards, who never noticed the quiet sibling who held the door while everyone else walked through. It wasn't hatred. It was erasure. And erasure cuts deeper because it asks you to question your own presence. That night, I stared at the ceiling for hours. Not tired, just haunted. By that little girl version of me who once sat at her brother's mock trial in high school and clapped the loudest. Who stayed up late helping him rehearse opening statements while he called her kid and patted her head like a pet. Who only realized too late that loyalty doesn't guarantee love. My alarm buzzed at 400. No hesitation, no drag in my steps. I moved like clockwork. Shower, coffee, vest, boots, files, orders. But as I passed the operations board, my name flashed red. Urgent Rainer deployment, classified briefing, 0600. I didn't blink. I just turned and walked. The room was dim. Colonel Wright stood at the head of the table, arms folded, lips tight. A few other officers glanced up, then down again quickly. There was tension in the air, thick and stifling. Rainer Wright began. You've been requested. By who? He handed me a folder. Not who, what. Inside, the mission details were sparse, intentionally redacted. But the location, it hit me like a blow. That region, that city, that name. My brother's firm had opened a satellite office there just 2 months ago. He had bragged about it in a family group thread I never responded to. I looked up. Is this civilian exposure? Wright nodded. Low risk, high profile. Reason for selection. He didn't answer right away, just gave me a long, slow look. Because they asked for someone with discretion, and because someone from a certain branch you used to liaise with remembers your work. I understood. It wasn't random, and it wasn't about me anymore. It was about something deeper. Someone in my world had crossed into theirs, and now they were coming to me. I accepted the folder. Back in my quarters, I stared at the mission ID. My fingers traced the edge of the redacted pages, and something inside me shifted. This wasn't just a job. It was a reckoning, a chance to look my past in the face, not as the girl they left behind, but as the woman they would now need. Later that afternoon, I boarded the plane in full tactical gear. The team was lean, 4 total. Silent professionals. They didn't ask why I was there. They just nodded. Trusted. Mid-flight. I stared out the window, watching clouds blur into silver streaks. I thought about the wedding again, about the glances, the shock, the silence. I had disrupted their story, their script, the one where I faded away and made space for their golden child. And now I was the one they would have to call. The mission would be simple. Escort, intel, evaluate. But what waited on the ground wasn't listed in the file. What waited was the moment they realized they'd need me more than I ever needed them. And this time, I wouldn't be sitting at the kids' table. This time, I'd be the one setting the terms. We landed just before dawn. The city was still asleep, blanketed in the kind of silence that made you question if it was holding its breath or hiding something darker. The streets were cleaner than I expected. A facade of normalcy. But underneath, I could feel it, the weight of surveillance, the tension in the air, the way civilians moved like shadows, trying not to attract attention. I'd seen this before. peace pretending to be peace. The mission brief was Clear Extract, a compromised asset embedded in a civilian tech consultancy with military-adjacent contracts. The consultancy A-Front. The asset Deep Cover. And the company owned indirectly by a U.S. law firm's new partner, David. Of course, they'd expanded fast. Too fast. I should have connected the dots earlier. The security clearance of the extracted intel had nothing to do with him. But he'd unknowingly built a bridge between the corporate world and something much more dangerous. And now, that bridge needed burning. I didn't ask to see him. I didn't care to. But fate, as always, had a twisted sense of humor. As I moved through the lobby of the consulting firm, I spotted him. David. Dressed in the same tailored arrogance I remembered. Standing next to a local liaison, laughing until he saw me. He blinked. Twice. The smile faltered. He took a half step forward. Claire. I didn't answer. I was already walking past him, flanked by 2 agents in black tactical gear. He was irrelevant to the op. He wasn't on the list. He wasn't in command. And for once he knew it. His voice followed me like a question he didn't know how to finish. You're military. I kept walking. Because he wasn't the one I answered to anymore. We made contact with the asset in a sub-level conference chamber beneath layers of fake glass boardrooms and decorative ferns. He was young, scared, smart, and compromised. His files were already copied. He just needed out. We ran the exfil with precision. No hiccups, no exposure, no chatter. Until the elevator doors opened at ground level and David was there. He wasn't supposed to be. Claire. He said again, more firmly this time. Can we talk? I turned, looked him in the eye. No, you can't just... I can, I am. You just disappeared. You let me disappear, I said. There's a difference. He flinched, just slightly, but I saw it. You could have told us. Told me. Would you have listened? His jaw tightened. I was your sister, I said quietly now. Not a ghost, not a mistake. Just someone you decided wasn't worth seeing anymore. That's not fair. No, I replied, but it's true. Behind me, the asset cleared his throat gently. It was time to move. I gave David one last look. This operation has nothing to do with you. Stay out of the way. He stepped aside. We moved through the lobby out into the armored transport and drove off. I didn't look back. Because the only thing back there was the past, and I wasn't living there anymore. Back at the base, debrief was brief. Clean exfil. Secured intel. Minimal exposure. Except for one thing, I had become exposed. Not to the enemy, but to him, and maybe to myself. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner of my room, boots still on, uniform still zipped, replaying the moment in the lobby. The way his face broke when I said, "You let me disappear." I hadn't planned to say it, but it came out clean, sharp, real, and maybe that was the point. I'd spent years constructing silence like armor, but sometimes silence is just another kind of weight. And tonight, I felt it pressing against me in a way I couldn't quite shake. A knock at my door. Not loud, not urgent. I opened it to find Vega, my second in command. She handed me a sealed envelope. Came through civilian channels. I screened it. No threat. I took it, nodded, closed the door. Inside was a card. No return address, just a note in familiar handwriting. I don't know who you are anymore, but I hope one day I get to. David. I stared at the words. Not because they softened me. They didn't. But because they reminded me of something I'd once wanted. Recognition. Not praise, not apologies, just recognition. And now that I had it, I wasn't sure I needed it anymore. I folded the card, tucked it into my duffel, and sat back down. Tomorrow, there would be another mission, another rotation, another city pretending to be safe. But tonight, I allowed myself one small truth. They saw me now. And even if they never understood who I had become, they could no longer pretend I wasn't there. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of mission briefs, encrypted calls, cold corridors, and silent nights. The job never stopped. Not for weddings, not for regret, not for old wounds freshly torn open. I filed the envelope from David away in a bottom drawer beneath old field reports. I didn't destroy it. That would have made it too important. Instead, I let it live under paperwork like an echo I could choose not to hear. But sometimes, I did hear it. At 0200, when the base was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the generators from the East Wing. Or when Vega laughed too loudly over coffee and reminded me that family could be chosen. And then came the reassignment request. Top priority. Overseas liaison. Diplomatic overlay. Classified until clearance. But the timing too clean. Too coincidental. When I opened the file, it hit me. The mission was going to place me within range of the U.S. consular circuit for a private event. David would be attending. He'd become part of the legal advisory board for an international summit. The same summit my team was now being asked to shadow from the inside, not as visible protection, but quiet assurance. Ghost work. Invisible but essential. I didn't ask for a transfer. I didn't decline either. Orders were orders. Still, something in my chest twisted. Not fear, not anxiety. Oh, wait! A confrontation waiting at the edge of the horizon. I packed light, always did. 2 sets of uniforms, one formal, one field. No photos, no mementos, just function. Before the flight, Vega pulled me aside. You okay, Raynor? I hesitated. Why? You've been quieter, even for you. I gave her a look. You think I'm losing my edge? No, she said. I think someone from your past is trying to claw their way into your present, and that's dangerous for people like us. I said nothing, because she was right. We arrived 3 days ahead of the summit. The venue, a massive estate built to host the elite under the illusion of peace and collaboration. Marble staircases, glass chandeliers, soft jazz playing in places no one was listening. And among the roster, David Raynor, legal counsel, U.S. representative. There it was, plain, unavoidable. Still, I went about my assignment like a machine. Cleared rooms, memorized blueprints, assigned exits, assessed soft targets. I did not go looking for him. But the world doesn't care about your intentions when the plot is already in motion. It was the second night. A pre-summit cocktail hour. I stood guard near the exit in formal attire, nothing flashy, but enough rank to freeze someone's question mid-sentence. And then I heard him, not his voice, his laugh. It hadn't changed. The same chuckle that always followed his stories. The same one that made everyone feel like they were on the inside. I turned, and there he was, drink in hand, talking to a diplomat from Zurich, smiling like he didn't remember what forgetting someone cost. Until he saw me, he froze, and for once he didn't hide it. He excused himself and crossed the room. Claire. Sir, I replied deliberately neutral. Still formal, he asked. After all this, you're at a secure event. You're a guest. I'm security. He sighed. So that's how it is now. I didn't answer. He tried again. I didn't know you'd be here. That makes 2 of us. Silence. Then quieter, I meant what I wrote. I know. I wasn't trying to. You don't have to try, I said. That's the difference. I always had to try. You just had to exist. That silenced him. The music swelled behind us. Glasses clinked. But I barely heard it. I was staring at someone who had finally come face to face with the consequence of his own comfort. You built a world where I didn't matter, I said. And now that you've seen I do, you don't know what to do with that. He blinked. I didn't mean to. You never mean to, I whispered. That's the worst part. He stood there, guilt unraveling across his face like a suit coming apart at the seams. You don't have to forgive me, he said. I'm not planning to. But maybe one day. I'm not planning that either. I stepped back. But I don't hate you. He looked surprised. You don't? No, I said. I just stopped needing you to be more than you are. And with that, I turned away. Back to the shadows. Back to duty. But for the first time in years, I felt light. Not because he understood, but because I no longer needed him to. The next morning, the air felt different, lighter somehow. Not because the work had changed. The schedule was still grueling, the intelligence briefings still layered with uncertainty, but because something internal had finally shifted. David had seen me. Not just seen, but confronted what he never had the courage to acknowledge, that I existed outside the frame of his success. That my silence wasn't emptiness. It was earned. It was heavy. It was intentional. He tried to walk into my world. I let him peek. Then I closed the door. We had 1 day left before the summit began. Final checks, security sweeps, route rehearsals. It was rote at this point. We'd done it so many times, my body moved on instinct. But in the back of my mind, a new thought took root. What if this wasn't just a story about being seen? What if this was about walking away, not in rage, but in peace? That night, I stood alone on the upper balcony of the compound, overlooking the courtyard below. The wind was cool, and the noise from the dining hall below had dulled to a hum. Then I heard the door open behind me. Vega. She didn't say anything at first, just joined me at the railing, hands in her pockets, eyes forward. He cornered me earlier, she said after a while. David. She nodded. Wanted to know if you were okay? I raised an eyebrow. I told him he's about 10 years too late. A laugh, quiet and unexpected, escaped me. Thanks. She turned to me. What do you want, Rainer, really? I blinked. What do you mean? I mean, you've already proven yourself. To the command, to the field, even apparently to your family. So what now? What are you still carrying? I didn't have an answer. Not then. But her words followed me for the rest of the night. Into the hallways, into my quarters, into the dream I had where I was back at that wedding. But this time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was just watching, observing. Detached. Free. The next morning, just hours before the summit, I got a knock on my door. Another envelope. No handwriting this time. Just a typed slip inside. When this is over, meet me by the reflecting pool. 2100 hours. It wasn't signed, but I knew. At 2100 I went, not because I owed him anything, but because I didn't. The reflecting pool was quiet, lit by soft lights and framed by marble. The kind of place built to look peaceful, even though it only existed because the world rarely is. He was already there, waiting. Claire. David. A beat of silence. I wanted to say something, he began. Not to change anything, just to say it. I crossed my arms, waiting. When you left, I didn't chase you. I didn't call. I didn't ask why. And I told myself it was because you didn't want to be found. I said nothing. But now I think maybe I didn't want to find you. Because if I did, I'd have to admit I let you down. Still nothing. I was the big brother, he said. But you were the one who protected yourself, who built something. I just inherited everything, and I didn't realize the weight of that until I saw you walk out of that helicopter. He took a step forward. I don't expect anything from you, not forgiveness, not family. But if you ever want to talk, really talk, I'll be here. I looked at him. Really looked. He meant it. He didn't understand me. He probably never would. But this wasn't about understanding. It was about recognition. And this time, he wasn't demanding anything. He was offering. I nodded, just once, then turned and walked away. Because maybe that's how healing starts, not with closure, but with the courage to leave the door unlocked. Behind me, I heard him whisper, "You were always stronger than me." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. He finally said the one thing that didn't require a response. The summit began with applause, but beneath the surface tension simmered like a fault line ready to split open. Security was tighter than usual. Multiple delegations. Intel chatter of potential disruptions. Nothing confirmed, but everything possible. I shifted into full operational mode. No time for reflection now. No more conversations. No more ghosts. For the next 72 hours, I existed in pure function alert, detached, efficient. We rotated watch positions, cross-checked entry protocols, and intercepted 3 attempted breaches before they became headlines. Not a single one made the news. That's how we knew we were doing it right. By the end of day 3, my body moved on instinct, but my mind, it had started wandering again. Not backward, not to the wedding or the childhood, or the dismissals, but forward. I began asking myself questions I had long buried beneath mission folders and encrypted messages. What would life look like if I stopped chasing significance? What if being seen wasn't the point anymore? What if I wanted peace? On the final night after the summit ended and the dignitaries retreated to private jets and polished cars, Vega and I stood by the helipad, our gear slung low, exhaustion in our bones. "You heading back with us?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "You thinking of staying in this unit?" "I don't know that either." She didn't push. She just gave me a long look and said, "It's okay to want something different now." I nodded. "I just don't know what that is." And then she said the thing I'd been avoiding. "You've already won, Claire. You made them see. You walked into the fire and didn't flinch. So, now what? What do you want when the mission becomes optional?" Her words hung in the air long after she walked away. And that night, I sat alone under the floodlights, staring at the empty helipad, remembering how not long ago I stood in my brother's wedding tent, feeling invisible, erased, exiled. But I wasn't that girl anymore. She had grown into someone else. And maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to want more than justice. Maybe she was allowed to want joy. The next morning, as we packed our gear, I received a message. Civilian line. Unsecured. It was from Eliza. "I know we've never really spoken, but I wanted you to know I watched you that day, and I've never forgotten it." She included a photo. From the wedding. Me standing tall in front of the helicopter, sunlight flaring behind me, wind lifting the hem of my uniform. My mother was in the background, frozen mid-step. David was looking up, jaw slack. But me, I looked like I had always belonged. There was no nameplate, no caption. Just that moment, frozen in time. And I realized something. I didn't need them to tell my story anymore. I had already told it in how I walked in, what I chose, and who I became. I had written it in every early morning, run every missed holiday, every quiet act of strength they never noticed. And now, they had noticed. But more importantly, I had to. I shut my locker and closed the duffel. Outside, the sky was beginning to shift from purple to gold. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. I was finally ready to ask myself a new question. Not who have I become, but who do I want to be? 2 months later, I handed in my resignation. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. No ceremony, no speeches. Just a form signed in blue ink and a final salute exchanged with Vega in the hallway outside command. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," she said. "I didn't either." She nodded. "You gonna miss it." "I'll miss the quiet," I said. Not the noise, not the missions, but the clarity that comes with knowing exactly who you are every second. And now, I shrugged. Now I figure out who I am when I'm not trying to prove it. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a coin, one of our unit's challenge coins, and placed it in my palm. "For the times you forget how far you came." I closed my hand around it and nodded. There was nothing else to say. 3 days later, I was on a train. Civilian clothes, no rank, no call sign. Just me. I rode quietly, watching the blur of countryside through the window, unsure of what came next. But for the first time, the uncertainty didn't feel like failure. It felt like freedom. I stepped off in a small town just outside D.C., a place where no one knew my name, where I didn't have to explain why I stood too straight or scanned every exit. I found a tiny apartment above a bookstore. The landlord didn't ask questions. The rent was cheap. The floors creaked. It felt honest. And slowly, I began to live. I cooked real food. I slept past 5 a.m. I went for walks without a route. Sometimes I passed by a group of young cadets jogging in formation and felt a tug in my chest. But it wasn't longing. It was gratitude. That life shaped me. It also no longer owned me. One morning, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside, a folded piece of paper with handwriting I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. My mother. I saw the photo Eliza took. I didn't recognize the woman in it at first. And then I did. "I'm sorry it took me this long." There was more. Apologies, regrets, small attempts at understanding. But what struck me most wasn't what she said. It was that she finally said something. For years I thought silence was my inheritance. Turns out I had taught them how to be silent by staying silent myself. And now I wasn't anymore. I didn't write back, but I didn't tear it up either. I placed it in a drawer, next to David's note, next to my unit coin, next to the only photo I had of myself in uniform, the one where I'm walking toward the chopper jaw, set wind in my hair. That drawer isn't a shrine. It's a map, a reminder of the long road I walked. Weeks passed. I started volunteering at a local outreach center for women veterans. Not because I wanted to talk, but because I understood what it meant to sit in a room and say nothing and still feel heard. One day I was asked to speak. Just a short talk, the coordinator said. Your story might help someone. I hesitated. The thought of putting my voice to years of silence felt impossible. But I said yes. The room was small, maybe 15 people. I stood, cleared my throat, and began. I used to think the only way to be heard was to be loud, to shock, to succeed in ways that couldn't be ignored. But now I know strength isn't about being noticed. It's about knowing who you are when no one is looking. The room was quiet. Then someone clapped. Then another. I didn't cry. Not there. Not then. But when I got home, I sat on the floor of my apartment surrounded by secondhand furniture and chipped paint and let myself feel everything I had been holding for years. The pride, the pain, the survival, and the strange, slow unfolding of something new. Peace. I wasn't a general anymore. I wasn't a disappointment either. I was simply me, and for the first time in my life that felt like enough. Spring came quietly. There was no announcement, no sudden bloom, just the slow melting of winter into something gentler. The sun stayed a little longer each evening. The air softened. People started smiling on sidewalks again, and with it, something inside me shifted too. I started writing. Not reports, not mission logs, just words. Pages filled with thoughts I never let myself say out loud. Letters I'd never send. Moments I wanted to remember the way they felt, not just the way they happened. At first, it felt awkward, like I was borrowing someone else's life. But slowly it became mine. I'd sit by the window in the early morning coffee, in handpen in motion. Sometimes I'd write about Afghanistan, sometimes about that wedding. But mostly, I wrote about becoming someone I could finally recognize. I wrote about standing still and not crumbling, about walking away without running. One day while volunteering, I met a woman named Nadia. She was older than me, late 50s, with silver in her hair and scars she didn't try to hide. She had served too. Different war, different world, but the same silence. We talked for hours about mothers, about brothers, about what it meant to be invisible in a uniform everyone sees. She said something I never forgot. They only ever see the medals, not what we had to survive to wear them. I nodded, not because I understood, but because I finally did. Later that week, I was asked to lead a group session. Storytelling therapy. Not scripted, just sharing. The women sat in a circle, some guarded, some curious, some barely holding it together. I took a breath, and I told them about the vineyard, the kids' table, the helicopter. Not to impress them, but to remind them we are not who they thought we were. We are what we chose to become when no one believed we could. Afterwards, a young woman came up to me, barely 22. I didn't know people like you existed, she said. I thought the strong ones never got hurt. I smiled. We all got hurt, I said. We just kept walking. That night, I went home and pulled open the drawer. The photo, the letter, the coin, and something else I hadn't touched in a long time. My service medal. I held it in my palm, not because I needed the validation, but because I wanted to remember the cost. People always think revenge is loud. A gunshot, a scream, a slammed door. But real revenge, it's quiet. It's showing up when they thought you disappeared. It's succeeding when they hoped you'd fail. It's becoming someone they can't ignore, not because you want their attention, but because you no longer need it. That's what I learned. And it took me half a lifetime to understand it. One morning, I received an email from Eliza. Subject, they're naming the baby. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside a short message, David and I talked about it. We want you to know we're naming her Claire. I froze, not out of pain, but because something I'd buried deep inside me started to breathe again. I didn't cry. I just sat there in the silence of my kitchen, letting the moment pass through me like wind through open curtains. They had seen me, and now someone new would carry my name, not as a reminder of pain, but as a legacy of survival, of strength, of walking through fire and choosing not to become it. I didn't reply right away. Some truths don't need words. Some healing doesn't need an audience. And some moments are meant to be felt quietly alone, with the soft weight of peace resting on your shoulders like sunlight. It rained the day I visited the vineyard again. Not a downpour, just the kind of soft drizzle that made everything feel like a memory you were walking through. I hadn't been back since the wedding. I told myself I was coming for closure, but really, I just wanted to see if the ghosts had faded. The place looked the same. Same gravel driveway, same flower beds, same old wooden arch with fading white paint. But something was different. Me? I wasn't walking in as the forgotten sister. I wasn't walking in to prove anything. I was just walking. Inside, the new manager greeted me. Young, friendly, oblivious to the stories soaked into these walls. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? I asked if I could walk around. He nodded. Of course, ma'am. Ma'am? It still made me smile. I moved through the space, slowly letting the air speak, letting the memories come as they pleased. Here was the table where they laughed without me. There was the dance floor I never stepped onto. And over there, the spot where I stood, when the rotors drowned out every lie they'd ever told me about who I wasn't. I stood there again. Same spot, different woman. I closed my eyes. No bitterness, no anger, just peace. Because I had reclaimed the story, not through revenge, through presence, through survival, through becoming. I sat on a bench near the fountain. It was overgrown now, vines curling through the stone. Like time was trying to make it beautiful again. I pulled a notebook from my bag, the same one I'd started back in the city, and I wrote, "There was a time I thought I had to scream to be heard. Now I know silence speaks louder when it comes from someone who's found her voice." A breeze passed through the trees, and I felt her. The girl I used to be, the one who sat alone at family dinners, the one who was told she was too quiet, too serious, too much. She was still inside me, but she wasn't in pain anymore. She was watching, proud. I stayed there until the sun started setting behind the hills, painting the sky in gold and ash. Then I stood, placed a hand on the old fountain, and whispered, "Thank you for forgetting me." Because if they hadn't, I might never have remembered who I really was. I left the vineyard without looking back. No photos, no goodbyes, just one last truth settled quietly in my chest. I didn't rise from their shadows. I rose in spite of them, and I'm not done rising yet.